Characters. Who are they? What are they? Who will they become? So much goes into the creation of a character. Their backstory, culture, origins, abilities, personality, description, and so much more. As a reader, we only get a glimpse of what truly goes into the development of each character. So sit back and relax as we explore characters in depth on this week's episode of Character Driven with Madeline Dale. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Character Driven. I have another fantastic guest and creator of amazing characters with me today. Let me pull him in and I will let him introduce himself.
Hello, my name is J.V. Hilliard. I am an epic and dark fantasy author of the Warminster Saga, which is a 4-book series. First 2 books, The Last Keeper and Warden's Lair, are available now, and 2 more coming out right around the holidays and next spring.
Nice. So welcome to the show today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.
So go ahead and tell our viewers, go ahead and introduce to them your character.
Yeah, so my character for today's conversation is a character named Sir Ritter of Valkeneer. And Ritter is an old Dungeons and Dragons character that I played for about 3 years. And I got this idea for him as, a kind of a ripoff of Aragorn or Dritz Duorden from the Dark Elf series. He's a ranger, but in my realm, he's called a long marcher, which is not much different. He's a scout, and he lives on a very dangerous piece of property. It's a borderland where there are trollborn tribes and cryptid monsters that range near his village, and he and his family are lowborn nobles that are tasked with protecting a very important bridge for the realm of Warminster. And so it's a thankless job. It's one that no one wants, but it's a really important job. So things like duty and character are often crop up with him in the book in both a good and a bad way, sometimes to challenge him and make him struggle to make the right decisions. But he has this sort of altruistic streak, and very family oriented. So it's a super fun character to play because he's got this cool bow that he uses to defend it, and it's got a backstory with that too, which I'm sure we'll get into. But I designed him by playing him. It was someone I was seeing already through his eyes for a number of years throughout a very long campaign that culminated with a big victory for Ritter and his crew. But I was able to manifest the majority of his story in The Last Keeper and the Warminster Saga as a whole.
Sweet. So since you already mentioned his backstory, let's talk about that. Go ahead and share that with us, because that's the part I love to dig into the characters, because a lot of times readers don't see that.
Yeah, and I've gotten a lot of requests from readers for backstories and origin stories on some of my characters, and that's a lot of fun. And I'll likely end up doing that at the conclusion of the saga. But Sir Ritter, there's 2 things with Sir Ritter that I think stand out from a character perspective. The first is his birth. He is a low noble. I mean, the lowest of the low, and the only reason he has any sense of or has been granted any kind of nobility, it was from a deed that his grandfather had done. His grandfather had saved the king, who was touring the borderlands, and during that battle, he not only saved the king, but basically saved the king's entourage and family. So he was knighted, and he was then given this thankless job of fixing Castle Valkeneer, which had fallen into ruin. And they call Castle Valkeneer the bridge because the bridge is really the most important part of it. It guides merchants and pilgrims and farmers, and without a constant guard, they would be attacked by marauders and sometimes these cryptids. And so, Ritter ends up as a young lad going to a military academy where he has a chance to meet some of the princes and the viscounts and others that are from there, and they treat him like crap, right? Like you would expect.
Yeah.
He's just this, kid from the borderlands. The only reason he's here is because, we need to have him here so that he can be better at protecting us, right? And of course, they have to confront that in the story as he starts to emerge as a bit of a hero, especially in saving them, and part of a big battle that happens in book one, The Last Keeper. The second part of his birth is even more interesting. I look at it as my form of a muggle. So if you're a Harry Potter fan, you'll get this. He is called Trollborn, and it's a term that I use to describe people of mixed racial birth. He's part Raven elf and part human, and so both races kind of look down on him because he's not fully an elf on his mother's side, and he's not fully human on his father's side. And so not only is he this low-born noble that has all these horrible responsibilities, but then he's a muggle.
Yeah.
He's a mixed, like a half breed. And so there's a kind of a cultural message that is buried in the book that the princes and other people around him, including his love interest in the novel, have to choose to overcome based on these racial stereotypes that present themselves in the realm of Warminster. And even though he comes from an area where the Trollborn are not that rare. In fact, there are many that kind of walk freely among them without question. But when you get into sort of highborn places or other areas of the realm, they're really looked down upon. So Ritter has this sense about him, which is, do I really fit in here? What am I doing here? I just want to be in the woods with my troops, protecting my family and my village, and here I am, having to kind of suck it up and be part of this political structure, and I'm the lowest common denominator here. So, I think that adds to him as his character grows and as the story, kind of plots along. You'll see a lot of those challenges, both physical and emotional, that he has to deal with.
So, are there certain events that take place to help him kind of move past that idea where he kind of embraces this new life? He's kind of, I wouldn't say he's forced, but he's given the opportunity to live.
Yeah, yeah. So he's absolutely forced. I mean, forced is the right word. Like if it were up to him, he would not leave Valkeneer. He would
Mm,
protect his people. They're the people that he cares about. And all of his experiences outside of his village and in that realm have been negative. His time at the academy, he was good at what he was doing. And so his military commanders were happy with his performance, but others still looked down on him. And so he loved the idea of going home and not having to be part of that. He thought he was doing his duty for God and country, and now it was time to go home and not have to deal with that ever again.
yeah.
And lo and behold, it's thrust upon him as the main part of the story. And then the second piece is one that he has to make a choice between duty and love. He ends up meeting and falling in love with an elven princess named Adeline. And Adeline Elspeth is part of the highest caste of elves. They are these elves that are called Vermilion elves, and they were the first elves to be left. I'll use the term terrestrially, but left in Warminster when all of the ancients, which is my term for gods and goddesses, left for the Hall of the Ancients, kind of like went to heaven or to Olympus or Nirvana or Valhalla, that kind of stuff. So they're no longer here, but they just in those same forms that meddle in human, existence. And because she's of this highest caste, she starts having feelings for him too. As they're both outsiders, she's left her very secluded life to come and warn the realm about this pending doom.
Yeah.
And they start, because they're both outsiders, they start to fall in love with one another. But she's not allowed to consort with him, not just because he's a trollborn, but just because he's a lower caste. And it
Yeah.
wouldn't matter if he was a raven elf or a dale elf or any of the other elves that I've got in the novel. And so he has to make a choice because he knows that duty calls and that he should step away and not pursue this. But his heart's telling him he has to pursue it. And as someone that suffers from obsessive compulsive disorder, I've made raven elves um, have a bit of OCD too, but the good side of OCD. And sometimes when they fall in love for life, like a penguin, right? Like it's one mate, that's all they have. And so like he's kind of imprinted on her in this way and can't seem to pull himself from this budding love. And she keeps returning it, but doing it in a way where she's, there's in the beginning at least there's a distance between them, and then eventually they both have to make a decision. In his case, he's choosing between knowing what's right and is walking away than
Yeah.
knowing what might also be right and being with her regardless of what everybody else says. And so I think that's a real nice cultural question to as I world build around this for the realm of Warminster and the rest of the novels. It's
Yeah.
something that comes up and plays through all the time.
Holy cow. So I have to ask, how much world building went into his world, Sir Ritter's world?
Yeah, a ton, right? Like I took three main protagonists and the villain and really did deep dives on all of them, right? So in his case, his realm isn't all that different than you'd find in Middle Earth or Game of Thrones. It's that same sort of high fantasy kind of realm with all of this rich history around it.
Mhm.
And what I did was I wanted to have a constant threat of danger where he was, because that's what keeps them on edge. That's what keeps
Yeah.
him honed in. And I thought that that was really, really important. So casting them as just south of the Dragon's Breath Mountains, where all of these bad things can happen to them, there's no room for error, right? They literally, if they make an error, people die.
Ooh.
And the bridge or Castle Valkeneer, as I mentioned earlier, the bridge has never fallen. It's suffered, hundreds of years of attacks from trollborn tribes, crazy cryptid monsters, a variety of other enemies, including human elements. And Ritter and his men always have to stay frosty. They always have to stay in it. And so for him, that's a way for him to kind of ignore the rest of the noise, the white noise that's coming from the rest of the realm, because his number one duty is protecting that bridge. So that's part of it. The other side of it too is I wanted to mix some cultures up, and I can't just play out. I don't have the rights to Tolkien creatures. I don't have the rights to
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons creatures. So
Yeah.
I had to create my own races, my own terminology, my own magic system, my own form of currency, and I think all of that mixed in helps you make this rich world build. And in the case of Vulcaneer, it's a very small area of Queen's Chapel, which is a barony within the realm of Warminster. So you kind of pull the thread on that, and all of a sudden you're down to the granular level. And they've got the abbots that are there, that are the religious sect. They've got some other things that they're doing that they make sure they're vigilant in protecting the border, and that makes it a lot of fun. And I also think it makes it real.
Yeah.
My day job is in politics, so I find doing government affairs. I'm a lobbyist, and so I do like defense lobbying and tech
Uh,
lobbying in DC a lot. And what I end up finding is that if you insert real life scenarios into a fantasy world, it allows you to suspend that disbelief and say, I can get into this because I can see this really happening, right? And so I've wrapped a couple of those in that he has to unravel to
yeah.
make the right kind of choices throughout the novels.
That's actually really cool that you've done that, because
Yeah,
that
thank
does
you.
kind of make it almost more realistic, even though it's still high fantasy. Because that's
Yeah,
like one of those things that I'm like, reader, stop. Be like, holy crap, wait a second. This might actually be happening right now in the world. Like, what?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Oh,
that was the fun piece about it, right? Like
yes.
it was making excuse me, making his character as believable as it could. And I'm hoping people can see you've got he's not an unwilling hero. He's just he's dutiful. And so for him, he will sacrifice personal gain. He doesn't he with the king in the book offers him treasure and horses, and he says, give the treasure to the families who lost warriors. And he takes the horses because it'll help defend the Vulcaneers. So he's like, yeah, I'll take those. But the money, that's not for me. That's take care of the families who lost loved ones as part of this. And that kind of underscores the kind of person he is. And Adeline is there at court. He doesn't know who she is. He's nervous because he doesn't like being in front of everybody, especially as this troll born. He's thinking, oh my God, you got 1,000 royal eyes looking at this lowly guy, and the king is exalting him. And she's kind of watching from aside, softly, with her father, who's a diplomat, and paying attention to him. And she sees, not just the valor that he portrayed in battle, but she also sees this personal side to him. And when they have their first dance, she even asks him, was that real, or was that a gesture just to curry favor with the king? And he gets insulted. Like he didn't think of, like, he didn't look at it politically and saying, well, if I turn it down, I'll look even better. He turned it down so it would go to the right place, because that, again, duty called. And I think that that's something that will always be at the forefront of his character, is this need to fulfill his duty because people are depending on him, that are behind him. And even, there's a scene where he rescues a young girl, and
Mhm.
he gives his signet ring to her and says, go to the bridge and tell my sisters to take you in. And they keep her at the castle, and that's sort of like a family thing, as opposed to, well, get back to we'll take care. There's a refugee camp back there, and go there. Instead, he gives her what he can give her, and I think that's why I get a lot of good feedback about Ritter, and people can that cheer for him a lot, but he's got a lot of difficult things to overcome.
It sounds like it, but I love his character and how like compassionate he is with just the few stories you told me. In writing
Yeah.
him, did you have a favorite scene?
Uh, I can't tell you that because it's not out yet. I have a couple of favorite
Oh,
scenes, but in book one, there's a scene that I wrote that where they're trying to escape from the bad guys. I'll just leave it at that. And they're on a vessel that is sailing away, and they've got a surprise for these bad guys that are using magic to conceal themselves, and they know where they are, and so they're waiting for them to fall into, like, they think that they've caught Ritter and Adeline in this trap, and meanwhile it's the other way around. They baited them. And there's a scene where he and Adeline climb up into this crow's nest, and he has a chance to be that close and for the first time be alone with her.
yeah.
And I wrote it like it was your like 15-year-old crush,
Oh,
right? Because he's super inexperienced, right? Like totally, he's never been, like, he just doesn't know what's going on.
yeah.
And for him, and knowing that I've put this little kind of OCD thing into him, like his heart is pumping out of his chest, and she's leaning against him, and she's up there, like he's going to shoot this arrow that has a flame on it that's going to do some magical stuff, but she's the one that has to cast the flame. So there's all of these hidden, like, I have this flame and you've got the arrow and you're going to shoot the arrow, kind of. There's a whole lot of these, like, you could read through some of the symbolism there, but also the idea that they're close together. They're stuck in this small space that's made for one, and now there's two of them in there, and like he feels her breath on his neck, and so he can smell her hair, and he can see, it's the closest he's ever been to her, and how it affects him. And then they call for him to shoot the arrow, and he's so enthralled that he has to call a second time to shoot the arrow. And that was so much fun for me to write. It was just because I kind of wanted it to be super awkward, but also this kind of like tension. And you don't want to have like instant love in any books, but he starts to feel for her, because now he feels like, in some dutiful way, she's the princess of all of the elves. She one day will be queen. I've got to do everything I can to protect her. And he sees bad things that happen to her, and so he feels like, oh, I've got, he's the gallant guy that's protecting this maiden, and meanwhile she could protect herself. She's a powerful wizard on her own,
Yeah.
but in his case he doesn't see that yet. And so it's like I've got to be here, I've got to be her champion, I've got to be here to protect her, but I'm kind of falling for her. And then they get shoved into this thing, and he can tell that she likes him too, and the awkwardness for both of them in there. I almost wanted to write it through both of their points of view. I know that you can't do that, so I chose his because I thought it was the best way to do it, and it kind of builds the character a little bit.
Yes, that would be so cool if you could get both of theirs in there, especially with that, like with the infatuation he's got going on, and then that crazy scene. I can just visualize it in my head, like all of his nerves and stuff. Like, oh my gosh, she's this close to me, but I've got to focus, and just like chaos ensuing in his brain. He's like, oh wait, they said go. So
Yeah, it couldn't be a worse scenario for him. There
I
could not
know.
be a worse scenario where, like, nothing else he feels pressure about, and here it's like, and it's like, go, you have to fire right now. And that it was fun. So that's the one that I can tell you is my favorite of the stuff that's out. I won't tell you about books 3 and 4 yet, because there's a very, very, very favorite scene, but I can't
Ooh,
get into it just yet.
so
No, no
hard to
spoiler
keep
alerts here.
yes, it's so hard to keep from giving spoilers, especially with talking about the characters and what's to come with them. Um,
Yeah.
does he have a quirk that is your favorite?
Yeah, so, he it's not as much of a quirk
Mhm,
as it is both a strength and a weakness. Like he sees the good all the time in people,
mhm,
right? He's always searching for the good thing in them, and he'll and sometimes it gets him in trouble where those people aren't good, right? And he needs to learn the difference between what people of Valkeneer would be like in his small town, and how they would be a community, and they're in it for the community, and they realize that their survival almost depends on that community, as opposed to the realities of court, right? And the positioning and the power struggles and friends that look like enemies and enemies look like friends and how things turn. And he has to learn that. No, I like that about him because
mhm.
there's an innocence that's there with that he gets confronted about. And I hate the fact that at some point he has to lose that innocence to be more effective at what he does. But he always tries to believe in the best of people, even in characters that need some form of redemption. And I think that's if I had to pick a quality about his character, that would probably be it.
Nice. I think. So, what is your least favorite thing about him? Because I know some characters they kind of have a mind of their own, and with him, you've done a lot of work into his backstory, into the world of creation. What is your least favorite thing about him?
So it's hard. He's I don't want to say he's altruistically good. That's the wrong way of putting it. But he doesn't do things that he should do that benefits the bad guys,
Mhm.
right? Because he's too good. And I don't mean like pure good, Christ-like figure or anything like that. That's not what I'm getting at. He
Yeah.
just doesn't have a deceitful bone. He would rather be honest with someone.
Mhm.
And even if it's hurtful temporarily, they know that he was honest with them. And there's a scene in book one where he runs into one of the bad guys, and the bad guy tries buying him off, and it's like, "Hey, I will come and help you. Why don't Here's a bunch of money, and I'll send troops to defend the borderlands with you." And he knows he can't trust this guy, and instead of saying thank you and taking the money and everything, like leaves him at the altar, and is like, "No." Because I don't trust you. And it's that honesty that sometimes gets him like I'm not Ritter. Like I
Mhm.
would play the game. I'm a political hack, right? Like
Yeah.
I'd go, "Oh, yeah, yeah, let's be best friends." And then we're all looking over our shoulders. Where Ritter would just he would prefer just saying what it is that's on his mind. And he doesn't he doesn't know how to he doesn't know how to address those situations socially because he's lived this insular life that doesn't allow for that. So he doesn't know how to play in court. He doesn't know necessarily how to he knows duty and commands like it's someone that's above him. He'll listen to them to a fault, but he just doesn't understand. And it's part of it is just his his innocence and not being worldly. And for someone that is the complete opposite, that's hard to write. It's
Yeah.
almost like you have to. I'm picking on myself,
Yeah.
by choosing to write someone that I think has some. This is a flaw. Other flaws, if I really, I mean, that's probably the biggest one.
Mhm.
And he also kind of looks down on himself. Like he's been told his entire life that he's not worthy because of who he is, either as a noble or
Mhm.
as a trollborn. And it doesn't affect what he does, but it affects him personally that you get from his own introspection as you read it, but it never affect he never tries to make the wrong decision based on it. um and the hardest decision he's got to make is, does he pursue this budding love with Adeline? And he knows that that'll blow up lots of things, and so the duty side is pulling him in one direction and the love side's pulling him in the other. So it's fun to see how that'll end up for you.
That's so crazy. Does his okay with his personality being like it is? Does it end up causing like other people within the court when he's there, do they end up having grudges against him for him being like he
Oh
is?
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's the juice of it, right? Like the juice is the rival kingdom that's about to do a coup is
Ooh,
trying to buy him off. And they can't buy him. He's just you can't buy him off. It's just not his in his DNA. And in doing so, they realize they've made an enemy out of him, and now they've come out to him in that sense. It's like, hey, we want to be your allies. And in a normal sitting at court, they might have taken that bribe. And in Ritter's case, he denies it forthright and knows that they're on the other opposite side now, even though they haven't presented that in the storyline yet. He just knows that there's an effort to buy him out by one of his enemies who now wants to be his friend miraculously. And he uses this good deed where he saves the princes, as part of this initial battle against some brigands, to do that. They're like, hey, I'm trying to put this behind us. Here's some money. And he's like, and he makes enemies. Or based on his thwarting of some of the plans of the other bad guys, he's now in their crosshairs. Like the entire time, they're chasing either Damus, who is one main character, or Adeline, who's the other. And, now all of a sudden they can't get to either one of them without going through Ritter. And so now it's like, oh, how do we get rid of this guy? And so there are plots that are hatched against him based on his success, like his literal skillfulness in sort of defeating these other plots that are going on around him, which I think is interesting, because in the end, they're, instead of targeting their targets, they're now targeting him, and that's what he wants. He doesn't want the crosshairs on Adeline or even Damus. He bring it to me. I'll be the one you have to fight, and I think that all plays into being consistent with his character.
Grudges are so fun. Well, go ahead and tell our viewers and listeners where they can find your books and learn more about this amazing character.
Yeah, so you can go, and the Warminster Saga is available pretty much anywhere you look. If you go to my publisher, which is dragonmoonpress.com, you'll find them there. If you prefer to use Amazon or Barnes and Noble or any of the other distribution channels that are out there, you'll find it pretty ubiquitously around that in ebook or paperback format. And if you like audiobooks, check out Apple Books. You can check out just Audible. It's going to be there too on all those major platforms. So have a look for it. Look for Realm of Warminster or J.V. Hilliard, or the first book, which is The Last Keeper, and that'll get you started.
3.
Well, that's okay.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
It has been a real pleasure, and thank you very much for having me on. I enjoyed every moment of our conversation. This is always fun to talk about your favorite character. It's an easy one.
We couldn't get them through, a voice called from behind him. The horses, nervous beasts, horrible with magic. I suppose you knew that would slow us down. The man came to a halt, his head turning. He made no reply. Then again, said the other, more quietly, I suppose you also knew we wouldn't need horses to catch you. What a state you're in, old friend. Still better looking than you, Captain, the man answered. His pursuer sighed. You could stall all you want, Great Taurus. We have to take you back to the cathedral, and you're in no state to run any farther. Do you see me running? Great Taurus replied, and with a sharp gesture he uttered a single word, and the door in the air disappeared. At least your horses can run free without you. Why are you trying to force my hand? The captain was beginning to sound frustrated. We can reopen the portal at need. You're only drawing out the inevitable. Oh, is Radu there? Poor fellow. You ought to be back with your books, Great Taurus said, raising his voice and turning his blind eyes towards a crowd of men flanking their leader. There was no reply. Really, Roan, he's always been rubbish with a sword. The Great Keeper must be desperate.